point
Walden Bello, I've just come from Seattle. Of course, they're coming up on the 10th anniversary of the Battle of Seattle. It was interesting to speak to the former police chief, Norm Stamper, who today feels that he was wrong in how he dealt with the protesters. And when he describes their goals now, sounds like one of the protesters themselves. What about what people were saying then in Seattle protesting the World Trade Organization, and what people, the tens of thousands of people that are in the streets now of London, are demanding of G20?
Well, I think, there's a direct, hereditary line between Seattle and London, because what we were saying in Seattle then is, that globalization, this process of trade liberalization leading to more and more integrated global economies and the removal of restraints and barriers to the flow of finance capital, that this was going to bring about, disaster. And, and we've just seen, heard President Obama basically say, that economies have become so interlocked, that that countries basically are going down together. And this has been what the Seattle protesters and the London protesters have been warning all along, that globalization, corporate-driven globalization, was in fact leading, to a situation whereby when, the economic boom would stop and the decline would occur, that countries that had their markets so tightly integrated would basically spiral down together. And this is, in fact, what is happening right now. So between London and Seattle, I think, there's a very direct line, of a movement, which the global justice movement, that basically we've been trying to get heard for 10 years, but since Seattle, and even before that, but this was a movement, a popular movement, whose warnings were not heard or ignored, and because of that, we now have this crisis of globalization brought about principally by one, trade, the liberalization of trade, and also the absolute lack of regulation of finance capital.
And the calls to include climate change in the G20 agenda?
Well, there is, there is some nod to, the climate issue in the G20 agenda, but, basically I think what they're really, focusing on at this point is, the financial crisis. And this was, something that we had a debate on in The Hague, about 10 days ago, when I was debating the head of the European, Commission on finance, in which basically he was saying, let's worry about big issues like climate change later on. We just need now to fix up the financial system. And basically what we were saying is that no, the short term and the long term, the way you fix things up now must also bring in the long term, which is, dealing with climate change. And this is a very basic difference between the governments assembled there and the people's movement. And basically what people are saying at this point is enough of this separation between short-term and long-term, enough of this separation between finance and the ecology. People are basically saying that they're looking for fundamental integrated solutions at this point, and the G20 governments are not giving that because they really are not capable of giving that at this point in time. This is really because I think their analysis is really so limited. They're basically thinking that, they're basically limited to two things. One is stimulus, and secondly is some sort of light financial regulation so that things are not too deregulated. And that's the kind of very narrow gauge kind of solutions that they're bringing to this massive crisis that has financial, trade, ecological, and governance dimensions. So you see, if you leave it up to a small body of governments like this to come up with a solution, you're really going to you're really going to have solutions that are very narrow.
Weldon Bello, we're going to have to leave it there. I thank you very much for being with us, senior analyst at Focus on the Global South, professor of sociology at the University of the Philippines. Thanks for joining us from Manila. This is Democracy Now! We'll be back in a minute with Seattle Congress member Jim McDermott.